Okay, so let's just start off with introductions. So, Ms. Bibb, could you just tell me who you are, what organization you're with, and an overview of the services and programs that's offered there?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany Bibb. You can call me Bibb. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I work at the African American Cultural and Resource Center. And at the center, it's a home away from home for Black students. The program that I am over specifically is transitions. And so it's for first year students. They have mentors and they have weekly programming on personal, social, academic, and leadership development. But outside of that, the AACRC has other student groups, and we put on signature programs throughout the school year, such as the Black Student Welcome, Kawamka, and Taimba, which are all celebrations of academic excellence and achievements, and just overall good times to get together. In the wake of COVID-19, our services are a little bit different, and we're not open every day, but we are still open in person some days, and we are still adapting our signature programs to a virtual format.
Kish?
I didn't tell about me, but it's cool. Go ahead.
You really didn't. Hola, my name is Kish, currently a senior here at UC, studying philosophy and international affairs, and I have the distinct privilege of serving as the president of our United Black Student Association this year. Last year, I got to serve as the political action and cultural education chair, so I did a lot of voter education / civic engagement work here at UC within the community. I was also a senator within our student government, so I had a extensive reach across the UC community, and I have helped establish the Black Roundtable this year. That's just the newest mechanism to enact like social justice change on campus. Essentially what it is a conglomeration of all the Black-based orgs on campus, and we meet somewhat regularly, typically monthly, to discuss issues pertinent to the Black community. So whether those be issues we think we should address to make like changes on campus, or just initiatives that we want to help support. So for example, the Black Student Athlete Association hosted a unity walk on campus. And so we worked with them to try to spread the word and just give them some support. But no, yeah, I'm a senior. I should be out of here this spring. And thanks for inviting me here.
Thanks for coming, both of you. So you guys all know I'm Cole. I'm the EOP coordinator, chairperson, whatever the formal title is for Highland Defy. And this is our EOP week. So the second event is how to be a better ally for the African American community, kind of going beyond posting just a black square on social media. So first question can go to Kish, just because he is at the top of my screen, and then we'll just alternate between them. So what is the Black Lives Matter movement? Just an overview for us.
So I'm not sure if a lot of people know the historical context behind the Black Lives Matter movement, but it was founded by 3 Black women in response to the acquittal of the murder of Trayvon Martin in 2013, I believe. And this is just to identify that there are issues that are predominantly affecting Black people in America. And unfortunately, the attention and the resources haven't been dedicated to address these inequities. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people, when they hear Black Lives Matter, they don't understand that this isn't to discount anybody else, but again, it is to bring back the focus on the lives that have been disproportionately impacted by the vestiges of slavery, different institutions within America, whether it be like the criminal justice system or just racist policies and people. So I think the Black Lives Matter movement is one of the biggest manifestations of this, I don't want to say the civil rights movement, but one of the most recent manifestations of one way to enact change within America.
All right, thank you. Okay, and then Bibb, why is All Lives Matter an inappropriate response to Black Lives Matter?
I think you have to really think about why people are saying all lives matter. First off, Black Lives Matter was founded, it was trending, it was popular in 2013, and then it really blew up in 2015. And that's when people started saying all lives matter in response. And so actually I just saw a post recently of someone that moved to America from Canada, and they were like, oh, I did not understand at first. They thought that it meant it was inclusive, but really the premise is that when you say all lives matter, that's discounting the fact that, like Kish said, all lives can't matter until Black lives matter, right? And so you can equate this to a certain type of cancer or diabetes or whatever. If you want to say, you know, diabetes sucks, and then somebody says, well, all diseases suck, right? That's true. And we also are focusing on diabetes right now. We're doing research, we're raising money, or also thinking about just the fact that when we think about this country, Black lives are marginalized a lot more and targeted, not only like by police violence and things like that, but are also disproportionately affected by even health crises like COVID-19. Those are the people who are on the front lines working those low wage jobs and are more at risk and things like that. So when people say Black Lives Matter, the appropriate response would not be to one up them and say, well, all lives matter.
I really like what you said right there, especially with that comparison to diseases. I think that can help a lot of people who aren't really understanding the necessity of the movement. Kish, what impacts has the Black Lives Matter movement had on the country?
So I'll start with the personal impact that I've seen within my community. It's inspirational. And not only is it inspiring people who have been affected by these issues, whether they see family members or just people within their community, so Black people who have been affected by these issues, but it's inspiring people who typically haven't been too involved in these spaces. So white allies or people of non-people of color who truly want to help communities who have been affected by racist policies or racist people. It has been inspirational, and to make sure that they know that they can be a part of this movement and, you know, be an ally and offer the resources and time. I think it's been inspirational in that sense. Unfortunately, again, it has received some type of a mischaracterization, which I think has been detrimental. But as we continue to discuss what it is that what Black Lives Matter movement really is, you have more people understanding that there are systems in place that disproportionately affect Black people, systems that are maintained by people in positions of power. So as we continue to have these conversations and include people who typically may not have been involved in these conversations, I think not only is it that much more inspirational, but it's that much more impactful. It's identifying racist policies, and it's identifying how we can make strides to get rid of those. So I think it's been inspirational to say the least. And as far as the impact, the protests that we see to garner attention around these injustices, I think those translate to actionable steps or identifiable steps that people have been taking to make sure people know about these injustices. So I think you do see the subjective, inspirational, and then you see the actionable impact that the Black Lives Matter movement has had.
Okay, thank you. Bibb, what is white privilege? And then going off of that, how do you use your privilege for good?
So when I read this question, I was not sure if you were going to ask us or you were going to tell us. Let's see. So white privilege is something that you're just born with, based off of your race or even sometimes your perceived race, because people can be white but also have other ethnicities and things like that. But it's basically the fact that regardless of what you go through, because everyone has hardships, it's not made worse because of your skin color. And so an example of that would be two poor working class people who have a high school education and they're going out for a job in an interview, right? They could be, you know, qualified the exact same, but the likelihood of that white person getting the job is going to be higher than the person of color or Black person. Another example, just going off of that, is you can see that Black women are the most educated group of people, in America specifically, but they are not at the top of the wealth chains and things like that, right? So they're getting a lot of education, but they're not being paid as much as their counterparts who are white. You could think of it in other ways as well if you like, but I don't want to keep rambling about that part. And then how can you use your white privilege? One way is making sure that in spaces that you are at, if there are no Black people or people of color, or insert the privilege around and able to speak, that you consult with them and bring their ideas to the table, but then really it's up to you to ultimately bring them to the table as well and make sure that their voice is heard. I know a lot of people love to help out by saying like, well, you know, I'm the good white guy, or I'm the good this person, and I'll make sure your, you know, interests are heard. But it's more important that you can bring in someone like Kish to be at the table, to actually say, because we can only hypothesize about what other people want, what other people need, if we don't have those same lived experiences.
Okay, thank you. If anybody has any questions that they would like to ask, go ahead and pop them in the chat and we will bring them up at the end, just after everything that's already been written has been answered. Okay, so our next section is going to be about being a better ally on UC campus. So Kish, the first question is, what are microaggressions?
So I was introduced to this concept my sophomore year here at UC. I was working in the Office of Student Conduct and Community Standards, and I think it was necessary that I learn what microaggressions are, because I was coming into contact with various people from various communities. So I had to check my privilege as a heterosexual cis male, because there are certain aspects of people's lives that I cannot relate to and I can't empathize with. So a microaggression might be a mundane act, so something you may not be consciously aware of, but can speak to underlying like racist ideals. So for example, the most common one are maybe locking your car when a Black person walks by, or saying, hey, can I feel your hair, just because it looks nice. Some that I personally have experienced, or just have heard of students experience here at UC, is not being accepted here at UC. So for example, I hosted a sleepover in a student government office, and there was a professor, a faculty member that walked by the office the next morning, and she was about to call UCPD. Fortunately enough, Miss Charlene, she works in the student government office, says, no, Kish is a senator in student government. He's avidly in this office. And that's just to say, like, I'm not gonna say if I was white, but would that assumption have been made if I looked like I was supposed to be there, or something to that effect. So microaggressions may not always be objectively identifiable or super explicit. And for that reason, you really do have to just check your privilege and say, hey, this is an identity that I cannot truly relate with. How would they feel about this sentiment or this action? So microaggressions aren't always covert, and I think we need to be aware of the differences between identities and communities if we truly want to check ourselves, so we don't, you know, keep on purporting microaggressions within our community.
Thank you. So for Bibb, what is cultural appropriation?
Cultural appropriation is basically when you take something from another culture that is either sacred or that they may have been demonized for, and then make it your own without really realizing or doing research about what it is. And even if you identify with what it is and understand, thinking about what the repercussions are if you do it versus if they do it. So for example, actually I'm wearing Bantu knots right now. This would probably not be deemed very acceptable in a corporate space, even though it's been around for like ever. And if a white person does that, you can see, actually you can literally Google it, white people have done it and they have been praised, right? This great new hairstyle, they're on the runway and it's great and people love it. All the while, there are people who are out here getting fired or not hired. And that's only outlawed in, I think, 12 states in America to not have discrimination against hair. Another example would be appropriating people's culture as like a costume or something like that, right? So if you think about Halloween, are you dressing up as a person? And if so, do you actually need to paint your face black? Because there's a thing called blackface, and you can look up the history of that. Or do you need to put on a sombrero and eat tacos and different things like that? Like, where is that idea coming from? How can you actually portray just being LeBron James without painting your skin black? You can put on a jersey, you can do this. And then you can even think of it in terms of the way that people speak and things like that. With slang, I think a great example would be thinking about the LGBTQ community, and specifically the Black trans community, and how a lot of slang terms that people have taken from their culture are like very popular, but is just deemed inappropriate in other settings. So that's my take. I guess I give a lot of examples rather than definitions, but if you need clarity, let me know.
No, I think that's very helpful. Physical examples are great for people to see versus a definition. It's easier to, I think, apply that to other examples. So thank you again. So for Kish, how do you tell when something is cultural appropriation or if it is just a trend?
I was preparing for the other question, but I don't think that they can be, I don't think they necessarily are mutually exclusive, unfortunately. Unfortunately, there are times that I felt the trend going around were kind of appropriational, if that makes sense. In the sense that if you aren't a part of that culture or you can't even identify with elements of that culture, I'm not going to say you have no business doing it. For example, I have friends who celebrate Ramadan. Diwali was celebrated this past weekend, but I'm not going out and, just posting, is Diwali. One, if I wanted to acknowledge and recognize this observance or the celebration, then I can do so by researching the history and the culture as opposed to just posting it on my Instagram. So you do your due diligence, understand what it is, as opposed to just, putting it on your social media to seem as if you are truly caring for these communities. So I think in the social media day and age we live in, you see people just posting things from other cultures, whether that be a Black square to show solidarity or just, oh, it's Juneteenth or another holiday in recognition of a culture or something like that. But when you ask them, what does that mean to you? They can't really give you any substantive feedback. So I think if you are genuine in trying to relate and support, acknowledge another culture, then you should be able to identify where it comes from, how it kind of manifests itself in today's world, as opposed to just putting it on your social media and being done with it. Like, you need to be able to back it up with substance if you truly care about whatever you are, whatever it is you proclaim to care about.
Okay, thank you. For Bibb, where was I? How do we identify racism on campus? This is mainly for white allies because you guys would know how to identify racism.
How do you identify it? You could think of it in different terms, because I think a lot of times it's hard for people to think like, what is racism? But it might be easier to think of it in other terms. So like thinking of it when you think about people's abilities or sexism. Like, I think a lot of people, when I give presentations and I say like, all right, do you know what sexism is? And do you see how that could be projected? They understand. So thinking of it in those terms. Of course, an example I'll give is if you're thinking of is something accessible to people or not, ignoring that someone is in a wheelchair is not going to help them get inside the building, right? We can't just imagine our way to them getting in if we don't build steps, or if we notice that there are steps everywhere and we're not reporting that and speaking up, or noticing that an elevator is broken, right? The same thing could be said for racism. So if you are noticing that someone in your class or a professor or whoever is, they are making it a place that is not safe for other students, then that could be racism overtly, right? Y'all know what overt racism is. You know, that's when you saying stuff about, I won't even go into, I just had a flashback of 2015. But I'll send y'all some examples of that one actually, of racism on campus. But thinking about how you would feel if you were in a place of less power, if somebody like said that to you. So you can even think of that, like if your professor is talking in a condescending way to a woman, and they're doing the same thing to a Black man or whoever, then maybe that could help you identify racism. Was there a second part of that question?
Yeah, so there's two follow-up questions. So one is, how do you intervene as a white ally? And then second one is, and I don't mean to be triggering, so if either of you don't feel comfortable answering this, it is, what are examples of racism that we may not realize are hurtful and offensive?
Okay, so with the first question, what can you do? You can speak up and speak out. You know, in a lot of places, sometimes someone will know, like, hey, I know that felt hurtful to myself, but this is not a place where I feel like I can actually say something. And so it might take a lot out of that person to speak up and say, like, wow, that really made me feel away. But if you know that it's wrong, you could say, like, hey, I really think you should rethink what you're saying, or this is not right. I think a lot of times people do need someone there to know that they're not alone, because when they look to their left and to their right in a classroom of 30, there might be one or two. And so it's helpful if somebody else acknowledges it, so that it's not just that, oh, is it just me and you, like the two Black kids in class that think this was racist? And then also another thing is, you know, when you stay silent, it kind of seems like you're agreeing and you're in agreement with that type of behavior. You can think about when you're a little kid and your parents say, you know, if somebody's bullying, you need to speak up and tell them to stop. It's the same type of thing that can be applied to so many other concepts around our lives. And then the second question, I'm gonna pass that to Kish. I think, yeah, you got it, Kish.
I think for the examples of racism, I would go back to microaggressions, because again, these aren't overtly racist acts on behalf of like white people. One that I get a lot is, you're so well spoken. And I'm like, well, thank you. My mother did emphasize like enunciation, but that's not to say that anybody who doesn't enunciate their words is less competent than somebody. That is very much an elitist sentiment, that I wouldn't call it racist, but it does have like racist undertones, if that makes sense. And again, these aren't always going to be overtly identifiable racist acts. So we need to have these conversations. One of the people who told me that, like, I love how well spoken you were, was my vice presidential like running mate. And it's like, this is somebody that I genuinely respect, and I can acknowledge how like competent they are, but they just come from such a different background that they can't understand that there are some issues and some statements and just some acts that aren't appropriate. And unfortunately, you won't be able to realize that if you aren't in these positions. Like if you don't have to see your family or friends being subjected to these mundane microaggressions, and typically you won't even be aware that it is a microaggression. So it is necessary to have these conversations, and they aren't always the easiest, but I do think they are necessary. And I wanted to talk about how do we identify racism on campus really quickly, because again, it's not super overt, but let's just like start with UC as an institution. UC is not a racist school, but just last year we changed the name from the McMicken College to the College of Arts and Sciences. We got rid of the March Shot name from the stadium. And again, these aren't new asks or requests, but the university finally acknowledged the racist values that contributed to those names and to those structures. So it doesn't have to be super overt, but think about the underlying principle. So like people would call Trump a fascist president, but this isn't a fascist country. We just have elements of fascism present within an administration. So I just wanted to add that really quickly.
Oh, thank you for those examples. And we still have room to grow as a university. I mean, we kept the name of McMicken Hall, the building. UC is pretty diverse overall as a university, but the College of Nursing, I know that I've seen that firsthand. We have far, far to go in terms of diversity. Okay, so our next question is, where do we go, specifically white allies, if we have questions or we don't know how to help people of color?
I can take that one. One of my biggest sayings is that convenience is the bane of our generation, because we have so much information just available and accessible to us. But if it's not right there, then people aren't as inclined to, investigate and do the research. But Google, there are so many different resources, whether those be online or books that you can utilize to be educated about these issues. So if you truly want to learn and educate yourselves on these issues, I would highly encourage you to do some investigating on your own. But if you do have friends of color, I'm hesitant to say that they'll be able to assist you, because again, they already have their lives to contend with. So don't just go to them like, I don't understand what racism is or something to that effect, as opposed to, hey, there's a scenario that I didn't really feel comfortable in, or my friend didn't really feel comfortable in. Do you know why that might have come about? So specifics might assist. But I also think, seeking out opportunities such as this, where we're trying to inform people who may not have been, privy to microaggressions or what the Black Lives Matter movement means, seeking out those opportunities and genuinely trying to be more educated, I think that is one of the first steps that we can take. But I also don't mind, coming to spaces like this. But if you are seeking out those opportunities and they are available, then I think those are also some pretty good resources to be directed to you.
All right, thank you. So our next section of questions is being a better ally online. And the first question is, what is performative activism? I will pass this one on to Bibb.
I want to say I think Kish will have some great things to add on to this as well. If you don't, that's cool, but I just think you do. So to me, performative activism is when you are doing it. Y'all remember doing it for the Vine? Maybe I'm too old, but when you're doing it because everyone else is doing it. So, for example, posting black squares is performative if that's all you're doing, or speaking up at a rally and taking the mic and saying something because you want to be the center of attention is different than doing the work to get it done. So I would say performative activism doesn't have to be limited to, like, if you're white or black or another race or something like that. Anyone can really do it, but it's just thinking about why you're doing it, how you're doing it, who you are centering in that work. So for me, for example, I work with the Movement for Black Lives, and we actually just had an article come out that talked about how you need to center Black trans lives, because those lives are marginalized even more than cis heterosexual lives. when we think about, you know, the movement work that we're doing. We have to keep that at the forefront. Another thing is just like, you don't have to be the face of everything. You don't have to be the spokesperson of everything. And then even thinking, is it appropriate for you to be the spokesperson at that time, right? So while I might be able to give a little bit about a particular topic, it might be more beneficial to the world to bring in somebody that actually knows more about that topic, or bring in their opinion and things like that. So I think that is a little bit of how you can avoid performative activism.
Okay, thank you so much. Kish, if you have anything else to add on that, also, if you could answer one of the other follow-up questions, what are some other examples of performative activism, if you can think of any, and how do we ensure that we aren't performing performative activism?
So I like the sentiment that Bibb mentioned as far as think about who this work is centered around, because at the end of the day, no matter how much work you are doing, it is appreciated. Like if you are genuine in your activist efforts, it's not about you. So making sure that you are the appropriate person to be speaking on these issues, if you are in that position, and again, being educated and being informed. So I do think that there are a lot of people who feel as if, unfortunately, they have to speak on issues or they have to show their support. And if that's not, I don't want to say if that's not how you feel, then don't do it, but be genuine in your efforts. Like it shouldn't feel like a burden or a task to try to support a community. If you don't understand it, then again, do that research and understand why they may feel so oppressed. But you should never feel as if you have no other option to be an activist, because it's not about you, it's about the people you are helping. And then as far as other examples of performative activism, I think Bibb mentioned this earlier, complete silence, you know, that's just as complicit as the act itself. And it's unfortunate because you might be in the minority. Like it's not easy speaking up, but if you are witnessing acts of racism or discrimination and you are sitting by idly, then I don't know how you can not feel as responsible in a sense. I'm saying that you have the opportunity to not only help somebody, but maybe even inform somebody else as to if they didn't know what they were doing. More times than not, they did. But there are opportunities that if you aren't actively inserting yourself in and speaking up on behalf of other people's, I don't know how you can proclaim to be an activist or an ally if you aren't taking advantage of those opportunities. And then the second question, other examples of performative activism? Yeah, it doesn't matter what color you are. Like you genuinely can be white, black, yellow, red. If you aren't, you know, being genuine in your efforts and you aren't, you know, the best person to be speaking on these issues, recognize that and make some changes. And yeah, that's all I got.
All right, thank you. I will let you finish taking your drink. I don't want to rush you. So next question is, so a lot of the times, especially this summer, we saw people post to their social media stories and share out links to petitions. What can we do that goes beyond just posting to social media and signing petitions? And that one I'll give to Bill.
Sure. So I think there were 26 million people in the streets this summer protesting injustice after the murder of George Floyd, right? So like that's one clear way outside of the social media sharing ways in your house. If you do that, please be safe. Make sure you are wearing protection and getting tested for corona after and stuff like that. But outside of that, one note on that. If you do go to that, also make sure that you're not centering yourself and that you are listening to the organizers and not trying to overturn things that have took planning and organizing. Look up who is organizing things before you go out and make sure that these are people or organizations that you can trust, because that's a whole nother story. People will try to co-opt things all the time, like change what's happening if you are in person at something. Another thing could be going to city council meetings or writing your governor or whoever. Another thing is having conversations with your families. And so, right, we're getting ready to go back home. We're going to be virtual for the rest of this semester, and then it's going to be a break. And so while a lot of times it is easy to be an ally or advocate or, you know, even strive to be an accomplice in this, but when you go home, you know, parents and other family members may not be on the same wave as you. They might have not learned as much as you. So thinking about what those conversations look like if something does happen, are you just silent again? Or are there ways that you can even bring it up in a better way so that it's just like out there, like, hey, this is something that I learned, because everybody's not going to learn while they're just going through their everyday days, but you all have a special opportunity at the university to connect with a lot of other people and resources. And then outside of that, you could just make sure that you're actually changing yourself and checking yourself, your own privilege, your biases. You can literally take the Harvard implicit bias test, and that'll show you, right? They have so many of them, and you can see, like, if you're honest with yourself, you can see, like, hey, I have biases against this type of religion or sexual orientation or anything else, and you can actually think about that and when you're doing your everyday life and responding to things and etc.
All right, thank you so much. This one can be answered by either of you. So reposting videos of police brutality. How can this be triggering to Black people, and what should we do instead to spread awareness? Sorry.
I guess I'll start because these very much are triggering for me personally. And I mean, I don't think that they are going anywhere, unfortunately. Like, I mean, I am reminiscent of, classrooms where we would have to learn about slavery. And I think when I see these videos, I'm just constantly reminded that these systems and these injustices aren't anything new. And then the policies and the people that allow these policies to go unaddressed, they aren't going anywhere. So I think it's very unfortunate and disheartening when I see these. There's one going around now, and every time I see it, I'm just like, I have to tap. I've done my research into it, which is what I would encourage other people to do, going to the other part of the conversation. But there are elements of like social media, I think Instagram, where you can add a filter saying this can be triggering. This does have sensitive material, but furthermore than that, that you post things to spread awareness. And obviously you can't be too aware of an issue, but if you see people within your circle promoting an issue or an injustice, then do your research. I think that's one thing that a lot of people forego. Like, they'll post it and then they won't really know the context behind it or what should change. So in regards to Tamir Rice, that's one of the biggest ones that I'm thinking about. The FOP union, that is the police union that kind of decides whether or not, or they kind of help the officers who are accused of murders kind of get off or whatnot. People don't do their research into these practices that have historically worked to help the oppressor, unfortunately. So I think outside of just reposting it, understanding what you are posting, understanding how you can kind of make changes or what changes should be made in the world is just another alternative to just posting.
I would like to add to that I don't need to see a video or a picture of someone's lifeless body to understand what has happened. Sure, they got killed a different way, shot on the neck, choked, all these different things, right? You could go on and on and on. But I don't watch those videos anymore because it's sad. I mean, the weird thing about it is I don't understand how anybody's watching it regardless of their race, because it's like so effed up. And so like, sure, I watched them back in 2015, for example, when Sam DuBose was murdered. I can't tell you how many times I saw that video, and I think it sometimes desensitizes people from seeing like people being murdered and things like that, but also it could be very triggering, and you could low-key have a panic attack watching that, because the real thing is, yeah, that's this person, but that could also be my uncle, my brother, my sister, myself. So that's something that I kind of think about sometimes when I am coming across this, is like, wow, this could be somebody that I know and love. And even if it's not, it's still messed up. You know, people aren't necessarily valued upon who they're in relationship to. But what I will say that you can do instead is you could share the actual information without the video, especially if there is no way that people can scroll away. Like, I've seen part of the George Floyd video on accident. I've seen other people say that they saw it in part on accident, just like going through social media. I think it was a 15-year-old little boy. He just got killed. I saw that image of his face, and it looked kind of like Emmett Till, and there was no warning. I'm just like on Twitter laughing at a joke, and the next thing I know, I'm like, what? When I could have still been made aware of that with a picture of him just like in a normal day, and the title of what happened, and more information. And then the last thing I will add to that is you can also just say their names. So if you've ever heard people say her name, that's a hashtag that was brought about just because a lot of times the catalyst that really gets people riled up is when Black cis heterosexual men are killed by the police, but then there are also lots of women and trans brothers and sisters that are killed as well. So just like making sure that it's not like, oh, this person got killed, it's like, not as Brittany Bibb, whoever it is, was murdered. Sorry, I feel like that was so sad, y'all. But yeah.
It's okay. It's like Kish said, these conversations might not be easy, but they are important. And I know that it's helping me. I'm sure that it's helping the other people that are participating right now too. So thank you for sharing. Our last section is going to be being a better ally with our words and actions. So first question is, how do we separate uplifting Black voices and stories without overpowering and stealing the figurative microphone?
So I think, Cole, this is a perfect example. Like, you could have done your research on Black Lives Matter and all the different social justice happenings within our society right now, but instead you chose to reach out to individuals who are a part of that community, individuals who have expertise on these matters. And that alone is uplifting Black voices and focusing on the issues and the people who have experienced those issues, as opposed to kind of commandeering the figurative microphone. So not only are you providing and creating opportunities for people to be informed about these issues, but you are consciously putting people who are experienced and have some experience on these issues and opportunities to speak on them. So if you can't, facilitate programs or, host events such as this, then, I mean, again, if we're posting stuff on social media, it doesn't have to be so triggering. It could genuinely be a Viola or Angela or Ruby Bridges. I think the anniversary of her integrating one of the first integrating schools was a couple of days ago, promoting her. I know she has an Instagram. She said a couple of things, but there are so many Black voices within our world to promote, and you can do that via social media because we already promote and post so much. So I think utilizing the different mechanisms that we already have at our disposal is just one way that we can continue to uplift Black voices. And I think it's important to do so in spaces that typically don't include Black voices that way, because perspectives are so crucial. I think I could have this type of program with the United Black Student Association, and while it will be impactful, I think being in predominantly white spaces and speaking on experiences that they haven't had the opportunity to come into contact with is that much more impactful. That much more impactful. So uplifting Black voices via social media or however we post stuff nowadays, and then being conscious about how we do so. So the spaces that we are including those voices in is super important too.
Okay, thank you. Next question is for Bibb. What does it mean to be anti-racist?
So to be anti-racist, you have to actively work against the privilege that you were given. So of course you could just go through life and, not give people microaggressions and things like that. But being anti-racist is actively working to dismantle the systems and break barriers with people and things like that every day, and with all of the actions that you do throughout the day, throughout the years, etc. And so that looks a lot like some of the things that Kish was just saying, thinking about who is most marginalized, and thinking about how your actions will affect others. I think a lot of times people have great intentions, right? So, I didn't mean to do this, but taking into account that although your intentions may be good, the impact that it's having on others may not be as good as you thought it was. And so taking that and really adjusting and pivoting to make sure that you're not repeating those offenses, whether it's a microaggression or something else, making sure you're speaking up, doing your research, giving your time, your energy, your money, just like you would do with any other thing that you're passionate about. So it's a constant work, and it's not something that you can necessarily arrive at. It's just something that's a part of your everyday life.
Okay, thank you. For Kish, we kind of just covered how to be anti-racist right there. So how do we have sensitive societal conversations? That is one of the taglines for Pilot and Defy, is sensitive societal conversations.
So when I hear sensitive societal conversations, I hear civic discourse. How can we kind of convey our perspectives in a manner that we are communicating how we feel, and we're also try to get other people to understand how we feel. I think it's important to understand that we all come from very different perspectives. Personally, coming to a predominantly white institution, the high school that I went to was predominantly white, but my home life, I typically would not come into contact with a lot of white people, and the perspectives that I continue to hear and see while I was here at UC, they were interesting. And I think it's important that we consider just like the different elements and factors that contribute to perspectives, because we can't discount them. Like, everybody's lived experiences are valid, but we have to consider other people who have typically been or traditionally been marginalized or oppressed just because of who they are. So you can't fail to consider other people's perspectives as we have these societal conversations. So yes, I am trying to listen and understand you, but in that same vein, you have to listen and understand other people as well. Yeah, that's where I'll stop with that.
No, I think that's a great answer. Yes, go ahead, Bibb.
I would also just say connecting with resources that are on campus or around campus. One thing that popped straight into my mind is the RAP program, right? It's the Racial Awareness Program. At first, Racial Awareness Pilot Program, but it still has the 2 Ps now. But that was founded started after another fraternity had a racist blackface party on the first time that Ohio celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Day, right? So like that was literally made to try to make amends. There are people from all different experiences that come together and have dialogues and learn about not only racism, but other intersectionalities of people's identity. And there's more, but that's a good one that y'all could actually do.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I've heard of that before. I will certainly look into it. Thank you. I think that something's really important that I certainly need to take to heart is you can't change minds by yelling. If you don't work on having conversations with people, you're not going to have as impactful of a change. And that's something that I really need to work on. So next question, are there words or terms that we should remove from our language as white allies? And either of you can come up with examples or ideas for that. I can go from everything from AABE to specific examples.
I think when it comes to AAVE, that kind of aligns with like the cultural appropriation discussion that we had, or like that sentiment. If that isn't, a vernacular that you would have used growing up, or isn't, common within your circles, then why are you using it now? But more than that, I think, broad generalizations or stereotypes we should try to stray from, because not all Black people are rooting or, actively trying to dismantle anti-racist structures. So I think it's important to not make big generalizations or stereotypes when we talk about activist work or social justice work. But as far as like specific language, I think generalization. So don't say that something is like ghetto. I hate that word. Yeah, any other discriminative language, it shouldn't be used. I mean, that goes without being said, but the stereotypes and generalizations, I don't think we should try to cast broad blankets across people in general. So even when it comes to allies, like some allies are a little bit more, I don't want to say woke, but they have been doing the work a little bit longer. But yeah, I think it's not a case-by-case scenario, but you should definitely be conscious of what you are saying.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about the first thing that kind of came to my mind is I was given the ally, advocate, and accomplice as like roads that people travel. But the thing is, like, to be honest, you can't necessarily like become an ally off of your own terms. That's not to say that you can't say it at all, but I just wanted to throw that out there to be like weary, because just because you think you're an ally to a certain community doesn't mean that you actually are. I can't just go out here saying I'm an ally because I did one action, right? That's that performative activism coming back through. And also, even though I might have those great intentions, the impact might not be the same. So just like more so being cognitive, not necessarily eliminating something from your vocabulary. But yeah, definitely strive to be an ally to different communities. And, I do that as well. But I also know that I am not the know-all person and that I probably haven't done every single thing that I should be doing. Now, the AABE, I do not keep up with what the kids are doing. Besides my own slang and like, right, but like I don't know what the, quite frankly, white kids on UC's campus are saying on TikTok and all of that stuff. So I don't have nothing for that.
Okay, our last question. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat. We will answer them after this one. So what are individual actions that allies can do to lift up the Black community, like supporting Black-owned businesses, voting for policies and representatives with Black interests at heart, or any other ideas?
I'll start with this so Bibb can, wrap up everything. But I think one statement that I heard earlier, maybe not in this conversation, was that like Black history is American history, and uplifting the Black community shouldn't be seen solely as like like a solely a Black thing. If you are helping Black businesses, you can just interpret it as helping the economy. You know, if you were doing your research about historically oppressed communities, why not just consider that doing history? Like, it doesn't have to be a solely Black thing, but as we continue to identify or acknowledge the fact that Black people in America have historically been underrepresented, marginalized, and oppressed, looking at different Black businesses to support bail funds for people who have been incarcerated and are seeking help in that regard. And also, again, uplifting Black voices, providing spaces and opportunities for them to educate allies or people who may not be as involved or familiar with these conversations. There are so many ways that we are seeing, especially now that we don't have the opportunity to be engaged in person physically. So, I mean, be creative. I don't know, host a couple of, maybe not book clubs, but discussion or groups. You know, you have friends, and it doesn't have to be a main topic of conversation, but every now and then, if you truly, I think one of the questions was earlier was, who do we go to for help? You can consult your own circles. And I think that might be more, maybe not more beneficial, but that would also be a beneficial way of kind of addressing your own biases. But yeah, I think making sure that these conversations aren't just sporadic. Unfortunately, a lot of these conversations only happen when something dire or like crazy happens. So making sure that you are regularly addressing your own biases, and actively seeking out ways to dismantle racist structures and policies. I think that's that's a couple of things that we can do to help the Black community.
What was the question again?
So what are individual actions that allies can do to lift up the Black community?
Oh, okay. So everything Kish said, because you were saying some good stuff. But then also, I mean, like seeking out people who are experts, or really organizations that are experts in certain areas is one easy way, I would say, due to the fact that we're on social media all day. There are people that are posting about what's going on in the city, or at the state level or the national level, on an everyday, ongoing basis. I know that is one way that you can like stay informed on what's like happening. Of course, you can share that as long as you're not just sharing that and calling it a day. And then also just being cognizant of what you're doing, right? So I think one example would be when you're in that group and y'all doing that group work and it's the one Black kid in there or the one other person of color in there, or insert marginalized identity, like how are you making sure that they're included? Not only after the meeting, when you say, yeah, you know, are you good? Like in that small meeting, I know that was some interesting times for me and others that I know. And I recently heard that it was one of my students. I was like, oh, dang, this is still happening. So just making sure that you're being inclusive in smaller things that you're doing as well. You're not going to just change the whole world tomorrow, but you can change yourself in the meantime and tap into other people who are making those actions and uplift that.
Okay, we haven't gotten any questions from the chat, so if you guys have any final comments, otherwise we can wrap up. And it's been a very educational, productive hour. I really appreciate both of you coming out tonight, taking time out of, I'm sure, your very busy schedules. I've learned things. I'm sure that everybody else has too.
I'll say something. I'll plug UBSA really quickly because, again, while there are ample resources, you know, at your disposal, just online or otherwise, one on-campus resource that you can always count on is the United Black Student Association. Recently, we've been facilitating discussions with different Black student unions at the 14 public universities in Ohio to talk about these different student activist efforts both on campus and within our community. You can also stay engaged and connected just to see the different events that are relevant to the Black community that we're facilitating throughout the semester. So no, yeah, the Black Roundtable has the Black calendar of all the events happening within the Black community. So some of those might be informative, if not just, fun to engage with. But no, yeah, continue to seek out those opportunities to educate yourself. I try to do it every day, understand something that I might not have understood before when it comes to understanding different communities and perspectives. So continue to do the work. Thank you, Cole, so much for having this opportunity. Looking forward to the recording. But yes, thank you.
Yeah, I would just say I dropped a link in the chat. The first link I dropped, though, was earlier when I talked about examples of racism on campus. That's just like old stuff you can look at. And then the second is n4bl.org. It has a lot of great information on that site, and it's the Movement for Black Lives, which is an ecosystem of 150 plus organizations. They are introducing the Breathe Act, hopefully soon to Congress, so you can check out that information too. I think it's breatheact.org. But I just wanted to give you all some information if you want to continue to learn and stuff like that. And then you could look at the irate8.com as well if you want to. It's a pretty old website, I feel like, at this point, but it does have a couple videos on the website from student activists in the past. And the one that I would really like to point you out to is the one that shows the history of UC. And it starts at 1858 when Charles McMicken bequeathed in his will $1 million for white boys and girls to attend the university, and it goes up through. And then definitely second/retweet what Kish said on UBSA. That's my people's forever.
Okay, so Kish Richardson from United Black Student Association, Brittany Bibb from the AACRC. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to them. You can find their contact info. Thank you so much for coming out, both our speakers and anybody in attendance. I will send you both out the recordings, and that will be posted on our YouTube and our IGTV if you missed it. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.